All right, we are on 320 right now. Let's continue with Ben's story. All right. Ben studied the museum in awe. The steps, the giant green statue of a man on horseback, the columns and windows. It was magnificent. If only his mom were here with him, walking beside him, her arms on his shoulder. Did she know his dad had moved, or would she have been surprised as well? Eyes on your book. Even if they hadn't been able to find Ben's dad, he and his mom could have gone into the museum together. Ben prayed that someone in the bookstore would remember his father. By the time he arrived at the address on the bookmark, his t-shirt was completely soaked through with sweat. Cigarette butts and bits of newspaper gathered in dirty piles on the ground in front of the store. He looked up at the storefront window. There was no black cat or boxes of books. There was no bookstore at all, just a padlock running through a metal grate that was pulled down over a broken glass window. Plywood sheets were nailed up in pieces behind the grate. Remnants of a sign that read supposed to say Kincaid Books, hung at the angle from a nail. Ben pressed his eye against a hole in the plywood and felt his stomach turn. Except for a few rows of fallen shelves, some pipes leaning at odd angles, and a couple of overturned cardboard boxes, eyes on your book, the store was empty. Now what would he do? As he stared, in disbelief, a boy about his age appeared from nowhere, startling him. This is a new character we're going to encounter, okay? The boy had long, curly black hair and wore a striped t-shirt. He had a Polaroid camera around his neck and a knapsack on his backpack. He was moving his lips and pointing down the block. What did he want? A man standing nearby waved impatiently to the boy. We're on 321. Ben's head roared. He gathered up his things and ran. The heat was unbearable and his skin burned in the sun, but he kept going until he was back at the museum. He bounded up the stone steps, past the statue. At the top, he tripped and the clasps on his suitcase finally gave way. Everything he owned tumbled out into the stairs. Ben bit down on his lip to keep from crying again. As he bent over to pick up his things, a shadow fell across him. He glanced upward and saw the curly-haired boy in the striped t-shirt looking down at him, his mouth moving. The boy handed Ben Wonderstruck, which he must have picked up off the stairs. Ben took the book, placed it in the suitcase, and snapped it shut. He then rushed past the boy and pushed through the revolving doors. All right, she's inside. Just wait. It's doing it more rapidly for a reason. You'll see. So she is inside of the museum. She's looking at the postcard, looking around. It says welcome on the sign. It's got pictures or they're called busts. People's
statues of their heads.
Yeah, sculptures of heads from here up are called busts. And so there's a bunch of probably presidents, to be honest,
That's
busts.
Yeah,
yes, Addie.
The person she's looking for, I bet it checked on Secret to the Museum because he died and they made him a memorial.
Let's see. Keep turning. Now she's in an aisle that has artifacts. Those are totem poles.
One looks like a little demon.
They're indigenous. Y'all did that on your Native American or American people's slideshows. I was just grading a few of them. Totem poles, usually from the what tribes? Think about it. North, which are called Inuit tribes from the north, like Alaska, Canada, that area, even though we weren't counting Canada. But she's in an indigenous tribe area. Turn the page. That's cool. Ooh. I know.
Then they're going to turn into our own.
They might be.
They're going to turn into
I know. Next page after the mosquito. Now we've got Ben. Let's keep reading. Yes. That's a giant mosquito. I'm just kidding. The air inside the museum was cool. Light filtered in from high above. It reminded Ben of the church down the road from his mom's library. So he's in a museum right now, y'all. The walls were covered with warmly colored murals teeming with people and animals and plants. There were long quotations from Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore. What did he do in the beginning of the book, Edie? What?
He made a museum.
Yeah, he's the one that started his own little museum on his back porch. Painted on the wall as well. This is the quote. It is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed. Ben wasn't sure he agreed, but he thought his mom would have liked that. She would have put it on her refrigerator. Remember, she had quotes all on her refrigerator. Eyes on your book. Ben had no money for admission, so he waited for somebody to ask the guard a question. Then he snuck swiftly under the ropes. He found a bathroom and took a long drink from the faucet. He washed his arms and face. The cold water felt good against his skin. He looked at himself in the mirror, and for a second, it was like staring at a stranger. With the water and dirt dripping down his exhausted face, he really did look like an alien. As he dried himself off, he noticed a discarded map of the museum next to the sink. He unfolded it and read the names of the halls. Meteorites, gems, and minerals were on page 328. Okay. Man in Africa, northwest coast of Indians, biology of birds, small mammals, earth history. Like his mom's library, the entire universe was here, organized and waiting. Outside the bathroom was a small cafe. On one of the tables, someone had left a tray with the remains of a sandwich and a half carton of milk. Ben made sure no one was looking, then he inhaled the sandwich and drank the milk. He hadn't realized how hungry he had been. He didn't pack any food, obviously so. He followed signs to the elevator and rode to the top floor. With the map in his hand, he easily found the dinosaur skeletons, which rose above him like ancient roller coasters. He wandered beneath the flocks of birds hanging from the ceiling, past Komodo dragons with forked tongues sticking out at him, and the two giant unmoving tortoises protecting their eggs. Look, Mom, turtles, he said to himself. Continuing onward, like a boy lost in a castle, Ben walked through gigantic hallways and down marble staircases. He discovered a herd of elephants standing on a raised platform as if they were posing for photography. In the Hall of Ocean Life, a whale hovered in midair like a blue zeppelin. That's like kind of like an air balloon, kind of, yeah. Sharks mounted to the walls looked ready to eat him, their deadly white mouths wide open. All through the museum, Ben marveled at the life-size dioramas cut like windows into the dark walls. Do y'all know what he's talking about? He's not actually seeing real live herds of elephants. They're stuffed. Whenever they say diorama, it's like a room with a background in it that has those stuffed things inside, okay? Yes, that's what he's talking about.
It's like real animals, but stuffed.
Yes, most of the time.
I have a prediction.
Go ahead.
Ben in this museum is going to grow for an older bird.
All right, I like it.
That's just what they keep coming up.
Yes, for the moment. But that's what he means, or they mean by the halls. Each hall is like a room with a different topic, okay? All right, the dioramas looked out into the endless vistas, which means like horizons. Blazing sunsets, snow-capped mountains, and high fields of grass. They make them look like they're real habitats. Each one was filled with animals that seemed to be frozen in time. They turned their heads, or sat waiting on rocks, or walked towards a stream and then paused, mid-breath, forever. Page. She's coming up to the polar bear diorama. Next page. We've got a hand tree. Cool. Not real. A lot of times the museums of art and history or science have art too. Hold on. All right, we've got her still looking at the postcard. In my opinion, she's there, so she must be looking for something or someone specific. Giant meteorite. Space rock. Yes. Fell from space. Next page. Now, she's looking at the information card. A-H, and then it ends with O.
It looks like water from this.
There it is.
All right. Anaito. Yes, who knows? This meteorite was discovered in Greenland in 1894, but it fell to Earth thousands of years earlier. Anaito was brought to the museum in 1902, and it remains the largest meteorite in any museum in the world. All meteorites begin their journey to Earth as shooting stars, streaks of white light across the night sky. So that's what she was reading.
So we're reaching our jet.
I know. Now it's closer. Remember, whenever we zoom in, it's typically on something that's important. Shooting stars across the... Next page.
Wow.
Hold on. Ben soon stepped into a dark, round space that seemed as if it had been built around the main object in the middle of the room. There, beneath the glow of a spotlight, was a gigantic black meteorite about the size of a car. Ben ran his hand along the shiny, undulating surface. Undulating means like waved surface, so it was bumpy, right? It was smooth to the touch. He read the nearby sign and thought about the meteorite his mom had described to him, the one that had created Gunflint Lake 2 billion years ago. So that's how Gunflint Lake, Minnesota's lake, was created. Meteorite fell and caused a huge crater. Interesting.
And then it rained and fell.
Yep. Had it been bigger than this one? If a meteorite was the same as a shooting star, could you still have a wish even after it had fallen to Earth? Next page.
What?
Okay. Oh, you're right. Yeah. She's stopped and is writing something now. Okay. Next to the meteorite. Flip the page. I wish. She thinks she's having the same exact idea as Ben's having about wishing. So she read the fact that it's a shooting star, which was what was highlighted on one of the previous pages. So she's writing her wish down. I wish I belonged somewhere. Oh, that's awful. And technically, I mean, that's a general wish that most people have. All right, next page. She's looking at it. She's folding it. Next page. She's putting it on the meteorite. Next page. And then she's keeping it there. All right, back to Ben.
What is Ben playing with?
Who cares? Let's go. You'll see. I promise. You'll see. You'll see.
They're probably
related.
Ben pressed his hand against the meteorite. He loved how solid it was. Eyes on your book, please. We're on 358 at home if you need assistance. Sorry, Zari, I'm not allowed to show your face, even though I just said your name. All right, cool. Anywho, he loved how solid it was. He placed his suitcase on the ground, resting his cheek on the smooth surface, and closed his eyes. He made another wish. Ben opened his eyes and looked up. He noticed a mirror on the ceiling, reflecting coins on top of, I'm going to say this right, a nido. We're going to go with a nido. How about? Amid the silver change, he saw a small piece of folded paper. Before he could reach for it, he was jerked back away from the meteorite. He turned and found himself facing an angry guard who was gripping his shoulders and obviously yelling at him. Just as Ben was about to apologize, someone darted past behind the guard, and Ben tried to shake himself free but couldn't. He tried to read the guard's lips. He thought he was asking where Ben's parents were. My parents told me to meet them in the Hall of Ocean Life in 10 minutes. The guard shook his head and said something else, and then looked towards the Hall of Gems and Minerals, where there seemed to be a problem. He said one last thing to Ben before walking away. Carefully, Ben balanced on top of his suitcase, reached up and grabbed the note. He unfolded it. In green ink it read, "What's inside the box?" Different note. How long had the note been sitting up there? Ben wondered. He reread it and thought about the museum box in his suitcase, his box that he collected his stuff in. He had put it back in when everything spilled out on the steps. He couldn't remember. He opened his suitcase and dug through his clothes. The box wasn't there. Turning the note over, Ben discovered a little hand-drawn plan of the museum's first floor, also in green ink. Running through the whole thing was a long dotted line that twisted through hallways and ended like treasure map with an X. Ben's kind of trusting a little too much in this circumstance. Ben followed it room by room until he came to a narrow corridor lined with dioramas he hadn't passed before. The X on the map was in the front of the fifth one. Looking at the diorama, Ben felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His suitcase dropped from his hands. He was staring into the shimmering lights of the Aurora Borealis cascading across a painted night sky. It's in the north where he's from. The lights, there's like pink, red. It's like a sunset at night, and they like flow around. I'll show you a video. It's beautiful. Yes, you are quite right. He was staring into the shimmering lights. I'll show you all a video of the Aurora Borealis across a painted night sky. Beneath the blue light of an unseen moon, 2 wolves were running across a snowy landscape, heading right for Ben. A terrible shiver rippled through him. It was as if someone had cut out the dream from his brain and put it behind glass. Remember those wolves? Ben read the name of the diorama written in raised gold letters. Wolf. Canis lupus. Gunflint Lake, Minnesota. How many of you have ever read Harry Potter? You remember Lupin? Yeah. Look at the technical name. Hold on. For wolf, Canis lupus. That's why his name's Lupin. Spoiler if you're gonna read it, the werewolf. Exactly.
Mr. Miller, I think
Addie.
since his mother died, I bet that she's trying to leave him somewhere, like up in the spiritual world.
So you think that she's trying to leave him like a message? Ooh, that's a good
Yeah,
idea.
but I also think that she's trying to lead him to somewhere specific.
Okay. So you think that she's from beyond, leaving him images. Hey, nothing's impossible in this circumstance.
I mean, it is
What else?
I know you don't.
All right, let's continue. Picture. I'm doing it so that y'all can see if you need to with pictures. Oh, a guard's behind her, just like what happened to Ben a second ago. And he's yelling at her, exactly like Ben. We don't need to know.
And she doesn't know because she's deaf like him.
She's deaf like him. Again, she's running away. And Ben. No, I didn't. We did that one. All right, let's continue. Ben felt his knees buckle. He stumbled backwards until he was sitting on the floor against the opposite wall. How was this possible? The wolves couldn't be here, but they were. He was staring at them with his own eyes. Did y'all catch the fact that they were also from Gunflint
Yeah.
Lake, Minnesota? Okay. Someone ran towards Ben and helped him stand up. He was so disoriented that it took him a minute to realize it was the boy with the curly hair, the one that was outside that tapped him and he ran from. A family with 2 little kids stepped around Ben's suitcase, which was still in the middle of the floor. The curly-haired boy ran over to get it, and Ben could see him apologize to the woman. As he returned the suitcase to Ben, his mouth was moving. Ben watched his lips then say, "Thank you." He straightened himself up and rubbed his face with his hands. The boy smiled, a lopsided grin. He took the green knapsack backpack off of his shoulders and unzipped it. He pulled out the museum box and handed it to Ben, who hugged it to his chest. The boy was still talking, and Ben could tell he was supposed to answer a question he had asked, but he had no idea what the question was. Eyes on your book. Ben interrupted. Why did you pick this diorama to meet me at? Okay, so what has Ben telling us? Who wrote the note?
The boy.
The boy drew the picture, wrote him the note, put it on top of the meteorite, okay? Not who we thought before, but it's the same meteorite, okay? Let's think about it. Then he watched helplessly as the boy answered. Ben stared at his lips and his pointing hands, trying desperately to figure out what he was saying. Hold on. All right. He was never able to do it unless the words were very simple. He's talking about reading lips. Ben kept staring at the boy's mouth. He repeated his question. The boy cocked his head and squinted at Ben. His mouth moved some more, and then he pointed to the diorama. Ben nodded. With exaggerated slowness, the boy's hand extended forward and pulled the museum box from Ben. He pointed to the engraving of the wolf on the lid, then back to the wolves in the diorama. That's why he told him to meet him at the wolves. That totally makes sense. Of course, the wolves on the box had given the boy the idea to meet him here. An old woman with long white hair walked up to the diorama and stood right next to the boys. She smiled kindly in their direction without really looking at them, then stared into the moonlit diorama. Ben and the boy waited for her to leave, but she stood there, looking at the wolves and the trees and the curtains of the light and the painted sky. The boy pulled Ben away from the glass to let the old woman have her time with the wolves. He led Ben down to the hall to the mountain goat diorama. Ben closed his eyes. We're on 368 now. For a moment and leaned against the wall. When he opened them again, the boy's mouth was moving and his hand was beside Ben's head, making a snapping motion just as the nurse had done in the hospital. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a little spiral-bound notebook and a green pen. He wrote something and handed the notebook to Ben, who read the words, "Are you deaf?" Reluctantly, Ben nodded. Eyes on your book. So he's figured it out, thank goodness. No wonder you ignored everything I said. Ben shrugged. Motioning towards the old woman, the boy wrote, "She's here all the time." Then he pointed to himself and wrote, "Jamie." "I'm Ben." Jamie started making strange shapes with his fingers of his right hand. When Ben didn't respond, Jamie wrote, "Don't you know sign language? I learned the alphabet in school." Ben shook his head. "Why not?" Ben touched his ear. It's only been a month, he said. What happened? Jamie asked. Ben read his lips. Lightning, he answered. Lightning? Ben nodded. I thought lightning killed you, Jamie wrote. Ben raised his eyebrows as if to say, I guess not. And Jamie looked as though he understood. Jamie gestured toward Ben's suitcase. Run away? Again, Ben nodded. He saw Jamie's mouth the word, wow, then Jamie wrote, from where? Before Ben could answer, the old woman walked past them, out of the hall. The boys returned to the wolves. Ben stared into their shiny glass eyes, mesmerized until Jamie tapped him on the shoulder and placed his fingers next to the word, from where? Ben pointed to the golden letters on the diorama that spelled out Gunflint Lake. Jamie laughed. Ben pointed again, staring hard at Jamie. The boy's eyes went wide. He put his hands on Ben's shoulders and moved him so he was standing with his back to the glass. Then Jamie backed up, lifted the camera, and snapped a picture. All right, she's in the hall running, remember? She's in the hall of what looks like birds. She is running from the security guard. She's still running now through the dinosaur fossil exhibit. Next page, gigantic diorama. This is one thing I learned, and I only learned this about 8 years ago, and I was crushed and devastated. I was obsessed with museums growing up. This, emotionally, not physically. Look, these aren't real. I know. I didn't know that. I thought these were real.
Maybe they based it off of real bones, though.
Yes. Now, he's right. Technically, some of them in some areas are, but they're mixed with man-made bones and man-made fossilized, parts.
But they were based off of that.
Yes. I was so sad.
And you know the dinosaur places that had the butterfly thing?
Yeah.
The dinosaurs were like moving and everything. I thought they were real.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. My child did too last year. But I always thought they were. So I thought like, oh my gosh, there are so many different dinosaur fossils all over the world. This is so cool. But I read one of the placards one time, like I said, not that long ago, embarrassingly so. And it said like replica of, and I was like, oh, I was so upset. All right, next page. No, I really was very, very upset. All right, we got more. She's still running. She's in the bottom for y'all right-hand corner, and she's still running. She's covering a lot of ground. Ah, looking. Now, or every time it shows her face looking at something, there's a new discovery. Ben. All right. The bright white light flashed behind Ben for a second. He shuddered, remembering the lightning. When his eyes adjusted, Jamie was smiling his crooked smile at him, holding the photograph he just snapped, a gray square with a white border. That's a Polaroid. It pops out, which had slid out from a thin slot in front of the camera. Ben knew it would develop by itself in the next few seconds, but Jamie shoved it in his pocket before the image was done. Sometimes it ruins it if you do that. Why did you do it? Jamie wrote in his notebook. Do what? Jamie mimed running away by moving two of his fingers like little legs. Ben didn't know how to answer. He just knelt down and returned the museum box to his suitcase. Jamie motioned with his hand, and Ben knew he was supposed to follow him. He didn't want to leave the wolves, but he was exhausted and didn't know what else to do. He wished he could just sleep. They walked through a long hallway and up staircases until they came to a door that read, "Keep out." Jamie pulled a set of keys from his pocket, shook them happily in front of Ben's face, then quickly opened the door. Ben stared into the dim light on the other side of the door. Afraid for a moment to enter, Jamie must have seen Ben hesitate because he took him by the arm and the two boys slipped inside. Dirty plastic tarps covered the windows, so the light was dusty and gray. I wonder why Jamie knows all of this stuff too. The room was filled with boxes, good ideas, and old books which lined the shelves all the way to the ceiling. Paper spilled out everywhere, and water leaked down a wall. A pile of furniture was jumbled together in a far corner. Everything was a thick layer of dust. Ben looked around and said, "What is this place?" Jamie wrote, "My secret room." No, what was this place? Jamie shrugged. Storage? Ben studied the towering piles of boxes and papers. It reminded him of the moldy archive room at his mom's library, with its shelves of ancient, non-circulating newspapers and magazines. Jamie pulled out one box off the shelf and removed a fur blanket. The tag on the back was identified as an object from a caveman display in 1947. He shook it out. With his foot, Jamie cleared away the dust and dirt from an area of the floor towards the back of the room. Beneath the grime was a checkerboard pattern, although most of the paint had faded. Ben was tired, but he was sure he'd seen the pattern before. Maybe it was on the bus station or somewhere else in the museum. Jamie laid the caveman blanket on the ground. He removed a flashlight from another box, handed it to Ben, and the two boys sat down. The blanket smelled a little musty, but it was soft and comfortable. Jamie reached into his knapsack again and pulled out a sandwich. He handed half to Ben, who ate it quickly, even though it was tuna fish, which he didn't like very much. Thanks, he said between bites. Ben felt a little better after eating, but he still just wanted to sleep. Maybe he could rest here for a while on this musty fur until his head cleared and he could figure out what to do next. Yes, Addie. Not yet. Let me get to a stopping point. It will be right before our pictures, okay? Let me see. Maybe he could rest here for a while on the musty fur until his head cleared until he could figure out what to do next. Before he could ask, though, Jamie lifted his right hand and made it into a fist. He then straightened his fingers and crossed his thumb over his palm. He repeated the shape he'd made earlier. Next, he made his hands into the shape of a crescent moon. So this is the first one. Oh, it's not on the board. And then crescent moon, C. All right. Then he touched all of his fingers to his thumb, except for his index finger, which he pointed straight up. No. Jamie motioned to Ben to repeat all of the shapes as he mouthed the corresponding letters. Too tired to protest, Ben started copying the motions as Jamie continued. E, F, G, no. H, he continued. Remember, he said he learned it in school. Ben liked the feeling of the shapes in his hand, and he woke up a bit. Some letters were easy, like C, L, O, and I don't remember, no, Z. You just make it Z. Because they looked just like the written letters, but others were harder to remember, like P, H, and F. H, F. I can't remember P. They went through the alphabet a few times, then Jamie reached under a nearby shelf, pulled out a shoebox filled with Polaroids, and slid towards Ben. That's like what Anne Sullivan did for Helen Keller, right? He spelled them in his hand first, then Ben tried it. Ben understood that he wanted him to look at the photographs. He flipped through and saw images of dinosaur skeletons, dozens of views of the floating blue whale, and close-ups of bison, lizards, gorillas, mountain goats, elk, coyote, and the wolves in the dioramas. Another section of the box had photos of museum visitors. They were endless studies of hairstyles, glasses, and clothes. One of the photos was the old woman they'd seen earlier at the wolf diorama. They saw that lady in a picture. I told you she's here all the time. Once I followed her, and she walked up to the Keep Out sign on this room and ran her hands across it. I'd never noticed the door before. My dad works here. So I stole a set of keys from the office and let myself in. Jamie's dad works at the museum, and that's why Jamie's there a lot, and so is the woman. So this photo album is what he's taking pictures of. Could be. What? 11:21. We're about to go to lunch. All right. Jamie then showed a picture of a woman with short blonde hair and bold glasses. He mouthed the words, "My mom." She was standing next to a tree with a swing set nearby. She works late, Jamie wrote. I come home on the bus after school. I have my own house key. I spend the afternoons by myself. We live upstate, which means not in New York City. Ben didn't know what that meant, but it sounded far away. You don't live in New York City? He asked. Jamie shook his head and flipped through the photos until he found a picture of a man wearing a crooked bow tie and a hat walking towards the camera. He mouthed the words, "My father." Instinctively, Ben touched the locket beneath his shirt. He lives here, Jamie wrote. I see him on holidays and weekends, and I live with him during the summer. Jamie reached into his pocket and pulled out the picture he'd taken of Ben. He slipped it into the box before pushing it back under the shelf. Jamie pointed to Ben's suitcase and gestured for him to open it. Ben didn't want to, but Jamie's crooked smile convinced him it would be okay. Once he did, Jamie reached for the museum box. It was clear that he wanted to see what was inside. Ben hesitated again, but Jamie urged him to unlock the lock. Everything was in its place. The 2 gray stones, his baby tooth, the little plastic game piece, the fossil, the bird skull, the seashell turtle. Ben picked up each object and told Jamie a little bit about them. Unlike Billy, Jamie didn't tease him. He seemed to love hearing about them. Remember, that's his cousin? Yeah. He asked questions and put out his hand so he could touch all the items himself. Ben watched as Jamie held the objects, and for some reason it made him happy. Only his mom had ever shown this much interest in his collection. When they looked at everything, Jamie zipped up his green knapsack and slung it over his shoulder. He pointed to himself in the door. It's getting late. I have to go. I'll be back tomorrow, he wrote. You sleep here. It's safe. Toilets down the hall. Look out for the night watchman. Jamie waved from the door and left. Ben was exhausted and relieved to have a safe place to stay for the night. As he put the museum box back in his suitcase, he thought about Jamie taking such delicate care of the bird skull and the seashell turtle and the stromatolite. He lay down on the fur and drew his knees up to his chest, but as soon as he closed his eyes, his thoughts turned to home. He was sure the people in Duluth Children's Hospital had called his family when they found him missing. Were the police going to track him down here or to New York City? No, here to New York City. At least Robbie was probably happy to have his room to himself for a while. Ben imagined his mom sitting next to him, lifting his chin so he was looking up into her eyes. He waited for her to tell him what to do, to give him the perfect piece of advice. She had always liked to figure things out for himself, though, and when he imagined her speaking, the only thing she said was, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars." Then his mom disappeared, and he couldn't think of anything else to do except go back home. Ben's head buzzed and his skin prickled. He turned on the flashlight and opened the locket. He stared into Daniel's face. Maybe he had been completely wrong from the start. Maybe this wasn't his father at all. Ben had been foolish to come all this way without more information. Who are you? He asked the picture. There was no answer. He wished he could stay long enough to find out why the wolves were here, but the guilt over worrying his family expanded in his chest, and he knew he had to return to Minnesota. Stop and put your stick-it note on Rose's page. Okay. Whenever I give you permission to sit, now that we've got a few from each group, don't sit close to each other. How Edie and Jaylee were was great. They just split the sides of the table. That's a great idea, okay? All right. Whenever we come back, everyone else may sit. All right? Yes. Oh, I'm going to pause. We'll be back. All right. Turn the page. Ben was running through the snow again. The wind stung his face, and he could barely breathe. But something felt different. There was no sound of galloping footsteps, no howling, no crunching snow. Everything was silent, so he couldn't tell where the wolves were. Had they disappeared, or were they right at his heels about to pounce? Afraid to look back, he kept running until he woke up in a cold sweat, out of breath, with the caveman blanket wrapped around his legs. Jamie didn't come back till the next morning. We're on page 392. I cannot believe I'm still saying this. You need to look at your book. Libby, you gotta look at it. I'm reading it for you. I'm doing all the work. You just gotta scan the page. All right. Jamie didn't come back until the next morning, and Ben didn't want to leave without thanking him, saying goodbye. Besides, he needed Jamie's help to call his aunt and uncle. He was hungry, so he got up, changed his shirt, and headed into the museum, leaving the door unlocked. He used the bathroom, then went back to the cafe and finished the remains of another sandwich, a fruit cup, and some juice he found sitting on a deserted table. He then made his way back to the wolf diorama and stared into the glass eyes of the running wolves. Ben noticed a sign mounted to the wall near the diorama that he hadn't read yesterday. The environment of the wolf group, Gunflint Lake, Minnesota. This typical December winter scene is placed at the margin of Gunflint Lake. Across the lake lies Ontario, which is in Canada. Gunflint Lake forms part of the old fur trading route, extending westward from Lake Superior to Rainy Lake, which was originally selected to give the minimum number of portages. The time is midnight. The temperature has fallen well below zero. The curtain type of northern lights blaze upward from the horizon. The constellations Ursula Major, the Big Dipper, and Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, and Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, can be recognized. Ben looked at the night sky painted on the curved wall at the back of the diorama. There it was, the Big Dipper, and the tail of the Little Dipper. Ben could clearly see the North Star, but he never felt more lost in his life. New exhibition. There we go. Ahead. I'll get it together one day.
It's like discovering a new
I know. New exhibition ahead. Gage, put it on. I'm not, because I have to video. Ooh, a new man. Ah, looks, has glasses on, is looking in the direction
Oh, that's Halloween, I
of Rose running. Next page. Cabinet of Wonders, How Museums Began.
Wonderstruck.
Look inside.
Whoa, baby.
All right, I want you to look at our, let me turn those of you at home to view. At our cabinet. Some people called it a witch cabinet. Huh. Thank you, Gage, for that introduction. All right, back. What?
Are we gonna see what it's in?
They don't look alike because you haven't seen the front of it yet.
Are we gonna see what's in it?
Not today, but yes, you will. So look inside. New exhibit. Exhibition. Yes, Andy. You can. Yeah, let's go. Come on. As long as y'all are apart from each other. If you have a white table, no. All right, now we're at Ben. That's not our focus, y'all. We're not just hanging out trying to figure out what spot we're going to sit in. If that takes the majority of time, we won't do it again. All right, Ben had spent hours wandering around the museum. Then he'd returned to the secret room to wait for Jamie and unloaded his pockets, which he had stuffed with things he found around the museum. A plastic dinosaur, a business card, a bobby pin, a subway token. He was reading Wonderstruck. Then Jamie finally showed up that evening. He sat down next to Ben on the fur blanket and produced a couple of sandwiches, cans of soda from the green knapsack. Ben smiled, took one of the sandwiches, and drank some soda. Jamie pulled out the notebook and wrote, "Sorry it took me so long to get back. I forgot my dad was taking me on one of his work trips." Ben nodded. While he ate, Jamie reached under one of the shelves and slid out an old blue record player. It reminded Ben of his mom's. Jamie unsnapped the latch and opened the lid. He chose a record from a nearby stack and placed it onto the turntable. As he was lowering the arm onto the record, he stopped and smacked his forehead, like that. He made a face indicating he'd done something stupid, then pointed to Ben and then to his own ear. Ben said, "It's okay, you can listen. I'll feel the vibrations." Ben forgets he can't hear these things. He can't hear music anymore, okay? No, Ben forgets that about himself too, but Jamie forgot also, which is why he smacked his head.
Well, Jamie just met him.
Jamie smiled, and lowered the arm. The arm is what you lower to listen to the music. Ben placed his hand over the fabric of the speaker built into the front of the record player and felt the music, just like his mom used to do. When the record ended, Ben said, "I have to go home, Jamie. Can you tell your dad about me and ask him to call my family?" The strangest look crossed Jamie's face. "Okay," he wrote, "but first I have a surprise for you. My dad is working late tonight, so I have a few hours. Follow me." When Ben didn't move, Jamie wrote, "I promise I'll talk to my dad later." The museum had closed for the night and it was eerily still. Jamie led Ben down long hallways and through out many doors, some of which he had to unlock with a set of keys. The ones he stole, remember? Most of the lights had been turned off, plunging everything into darkness. The beam of Jamie's flashlight lit the floor ahead of them. When they came upon a night watchman, sitting and reading a book at the end of the corridor, Jamie pulled Ben around the corner and sat down another hallway. He opened a door marked Electrics. Carefully, he led Ben through another door to a row of folding seats and pushed gently on his shoulders, indicating he should sit. When Ben's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he made out the dim glow from a control panel where Jamie stood. A giant object like a mechanical insect appeared in the center of the room. It turned and spun, and suddenly the ceiling lit up with stars. Ben gasped. The planetarium! Jamie came and sat next to him as the sky filled with shooting stars. A planetarium, does anyone not know what it is?
No.
A planetarium is a big room where there is a projector in the center, which is what Ben was just describing. There's something in the center of the room. The projector, yeah, kind of, except it's more of a dome. It's kind of like that. And in the dome is the entire galaxy that we know from our planet of stars and constellations and stuff. Exactly. And it projects all over the ceiling. And usually the ceiling is dome-shaped as well. And it's very dark, but you can see and look up at every single star that every part of our planet can see at a singular time. Yeah, we don't know or can't see all of them just from where we're located in the on our planet, but people on the other side see different ones at different times because our Earth is rotating, right? So that's what he wanted to see at Duluth, remember? He wanted to go to the planetarium in Duluth. Well, now he's not in Duluth, he's in New York City, but it's in the planetarium room. We are on page 406, okay? So that's what Jamie is showing him. They're in the planetarium, which is just a dark room with a dome ceiling that has all of the stars projected on it. Very top. Jamie came and sat next to him as the sky filled with shooting stars. Oh, and it usually like moves and stuff. It's really cool. The projector rotated, the view changed, and the boys found themselves inside a meteor hurtling across the sky. They're not really, it's just on the projection on the ceiling. They flew to the moon and bounced between craters. One by one, the planets drifted into view. And soon they were out beyond the solar system, gazing down on the universe like ancient gods. Ben thought of the glow-in-the-dark stars in his room, and the Big Dipper, and the quote about stars, and his mom. The glowing lights above him spun and swirled, tracing endless patterns against the perfect dome of the ceiling like a million electric fireflies making constellations in the dark. Eyes on your boat. When the show ended and they had been brought gently back to Earth, Jamie led Ben out into the museum again. They passed the shadow-covered elephants and the hanging black birds that kept watch over the museum. Ben pointed up as they paused beneath the gray silhouette of a gigantic whale. Around them, all the dioramas were sunk in darkness. The glass turned into mirrors, and the dim light so the boys saw their reflection as they passed. They waved their arms and made faces in the mirror. Behind their reflections, from certain angles, the animals peered out like ghosts from the Serengeti. That's a desert in Africa. For a moment, Ben found it hard to imagine the museum ever full of light and bustling with people. The building felt permanently haunted. Jamie, smiling broadly, turned on the flashlight and ushered Ben into a rickety old elevator. He slid the metal gate shut and pushed down on a long bronze handle. The elevator jerked and lowered slowly into the basement, where Jamie led Ben down another maze of hallways to large double doors, peeling with a century's worth of paint. A sign on the door read, "Workshop," in stenciled black letters. Below that, someone had handwritten, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Ooh. Inside, Jamie wandered from table to table, picking up metal tools and jars of mysterious liquids that glowed like amber. Ben stared in awe, trying to imagine what each one was for. After a few minutes, Jamie mouthed the words, "More," and took Ben to a series of vast storage rooms. Ben looked around in amazement. He ran his hands across dusty old dinosaur bones, rows of little birds on wooden perches, seashells, fossils, bugs, and ancient clothing, spears, spears, turquoise jewelry, ivory buttons, and thousands of old fascinating things. The boys explored for a while, and then Jamie led them down a long hallway filled with one side with black metal filing cabinets stacked 5 drawers high, for as far as the eye could see. Teetering on top of the filing cabinets were piles of discarded furniture, including an old empty cart catalog even bigger than the one on in his mom's library. Ben stared down the rows of filing cabinets. There had been thousands of drawers here. He opened one and looked inside. Long hanging files with little tabs extended to the back of the drawer. Ben pulled out a piece of paper, a detailed receipt for the acquisition of the gold cup in 1913. He read it quickly, and then removed an old photo of the museum. Ben noticed right away that the entrance was different. He was wondering how else the museum had changed over the years. When Jamie motioned him back to the main hallway of the museum In the darkness, they retraced their pathway until Ben found himself in front of the dark mirror of the wolf diorama. The electric moonlight had been turned off, and when Jamie shined the flashlight inside, 4 glittering glass eyes flashed back to Rose. All right, she is kneeling and looking through a doorway, which means she probably got through one of the rooms and is like hiding, right?
A cabinet of.
Yeah, there you go. It doesn't look as crowded, but could be. She's looking up now, her handle of her suitcase next to her. Ooh, this is in the Cabinet of Wonders on the ceiling. So notice how it's not as organized, is it? As like a real museum. It just seems like there's random things. I mean, there's a human head, for example. Don't think it's real, but still.
And then there's a hedgehog.
Weird sharks.
A blowfish.
Snake.
Some kind of dinosaur.
Armadillo. Dinosaur-ish looking things. Maybe an alligator. Yeah. Turn the page. Now she sees something / someone. She doesn't look shocked, though. Notice, you said security guard. I like that inference, but she doesn't look worried. Oh, now she's looking at the shelves. Rows and rows of things that are not categorized like in a real museum.
I think they have something to do with one another, but I also
Ooh.
think that they're just wonderful and creative things.
I love that. I love that idea because I think she's right. We've got skulls. We've got nesting dolls, Russian nesting dolls that like go inside of each other. Yeah. Ooh. There's some antlers. If you, yeah, elk, caribou, something like that.
Somebody down there that's pointing a bow.
True.
There's a bow in there.
Bow and arrow, vases, pottery. Flip the page.
It looks like a shadow.
I would agree with you. Ooh, a hand reaching for Rose as she's admiring the rows of artifacts. Oh no. And Ben. Don't hate on Ben because Ben's going to carry this in a minute. All right. Okay. I'm going to draw attention to what Jaylee just said. She's right. If we flip back one page, it's a suit arm, right?
It's that hat that showed when she was cutting it.
Okay. Turn the page. I love y'all's ideas. Most of them are most likely true. When they finally made it back to the secret room, the two boys sat on the caveman fur and caught their breath. That was amazing, Ben said, shaking his head. Thank you. Jamie's face glowed. He took another picture of Ben and handed Ben the camera. Ben took a picture of Jamie, and they laid the image next to each of on their blanket to develop. Jamie passed Ben the flashlight as he wrote a long note in the notebook, his tongue sticking out between his teeth like he's thinking. I've never shown anyone the museum before. Your wolf box make me think you'd like it. Jamie paused for a moment and looked quickly at Ben. In that split second, Ben saw something in Jamie's glance, something that connected the two of them, beyond the secret room and their love for the museum. In a moment, the pen was moving again. I don't have any friends here. No one likes the things I like. No one shares this stuff with me, not even my dad, who's been working in the planetarium for 2 years, really knows or cares about what I do all day. Only you. Ben looked at the words, only you, and he wanted to tell Jamie he felt the same way, but he let Jamie keep writing. I wish my dad really cared about me. I'm sure he does, Ben said. Maybe he's just busy. Jamie shrugged and mouthed the words, maybe. Talk to him, Ben said, trying to imagine what it would be like to talk to his own dad. Instead of answering, Jamie started doodling in the notebook, drawing long dotted lines and arrows. Ben traced his finger along the lines, and Jamie laughed. Sorry, sometimes when I'm thinking or when I'm bored, I make up games for myself. I like to draw maps. When he read this, Ben said, I know, and you follow people around in museums too. Jamie smiled. I like having a place that's my own, to organize my photographs and listen to music. Ben nodded. My mom and I liked listening to music together while we were reading. She was a librarian. Was? What does she do now? Notice when it's italicized like that, it's slanty. He's writing. That's Jamie writing, okay? Ben tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He took the notebook and the pen and wrote about his mom in the car accident and living at his cousin's house. Oh, Jamie mouthed when he finished reading what Ben had written. I'm sorry. Ben didn't answer. Where's your dad? Jamie wrote. Ben shrugged. Are your parents divorced too? Ben shook his head. When he offered no further explanation, Jamie wrote, Are there really wolves in Gunflint Lake? Ben nodded. So why did you do it? Do what? Ben said. All right. Do what? Ben said. Jamie pointed to Ben's suitcase and mimed running away with his fingers. It's far, isn't it? Ben looked down for a moment and took a deep breath. After the lightning hit me, I was in the hospital in Duluth for a long time. I could see the bus station from my window. Ben paused and Jamie nodded as if encouraging him to go on. This is important because we've never heard the in-between steps. We heard the story of Ben when he was in the hospital, and then it fast-forwarded to him in the bus, right? So we don't know this part. Really pay attention to it because this will come in handy when we have to organize the events in order. I'm going to read that part again, starting with Ben looked down onto 426. Ben looked down for a moment and took a deep breath. After the lightning hit me, I was in the hospital in Duluth for a long time. I could see the bus station from my window. Ben paused and Jamie nodded, as if encouraging him to go on. My cousin Janet owed me a favor. When she came to visit, I asked if she would bring me a book I liked and a necklace of my mom's. I also asked for clean clothes, my museum box, and money from my mom's rainy day fund so I could buy some food in the vending machines. On her next visit, she brought everything in a suitcase. Did she know that you were going to... Jamie made his fingers run again. I don't think so. She wouldn't have brought all this stuff if she did. That night, I changed into my own clothes, snuck out of the hospital, and went to the bus station. I was halfway to New York before I realized I should have left a note for my family. But you still haven't said why you... And Jamie made the running motion again with his fingers. Ben paused for a minute, then said, I wanted to find my father. He lives in New York? I thought he did. Ben could tell from Jamie's expression that he needed to explain more. Hold on. All right. His expression, he needed to explain more. I've never met my dad. Thank you, Addie. My mom never talked about him. When I was in the hospital, I asked my aunt if she knew anything, but she said she didn't. I had found my dad's address and my mom's things after she died. I thought she might have been planning this trip for me, and I felt like I had to come. It's strange thinking about it now. It was almost as if something came over me. One minute I had the idea to find my father, and the next minute I was on a bus to New York. Ben shook his head, still in shock that he had actually done it. As soon as I arrived, I went to his apartment, but he doesn't live there anymore. I had one other clue, a bookmark from Kincaid's that he wrote on. I thought they might remember him. That's why I was there the day we met. I tried to tell you, Kincaid's isn't... Jamie stopped writing and held his pen in midair. Ben looked from Jamie to the pen, then to the paper, unsure why Jamie was pausing. At last, the pen connected with the paper again, and he finished the sentence. Isn't open anymore. Well, I could see that. I didn't know you were deaf then, Jamie wrote. The two boys sat for a while looking around the secret room. It was as if they were both waiting for something to happen, but neither knew what it was. I wish I could stay longer, but my aunt's probably worried sick. I have to go back to Gunflint Lake. Jamie shook his head. First, you have to practice signing. Ben smiled as he made an okay sign. Jamie showed Ben the letters again, and they spelled each other's names. They practiced spelling different words, and after a while, Ben was able to sign most of the alphabet. Jamie paused and picked up the notebook. My mom's coming to visit tomorrow, so I'll be away. I have to go home, Jamie. You said you'd asked your dad to help me. Jamie looked at Ben as if he was trying to figure out something. Look at your book. He finally wrote, I'm worried my dad will get mad at me. Why? You helped me. Isn't that a good thing? Jamie reached into his pocket and gave Ben his set of keys. Stay and explore a little longer. We'll figure out what to do. Just be careful. Leave the door open for me. I'll see you in 2 days. Ben wrote down a number on a page in the notebook, which he handed back to Jamie. Will you call my aunt and uncle for me then? Tell them I'm okay, and they can come get me at the museum. Jamie ripped out a piece of paper and said, Sure. He reached into his bag and pulled out some sandwiches and apples for Ben. Then he pressed the notebook and pen into Ben's hand. For you. Thanks. Please don't forget to call. Stop at the hand. Put your sticky note down. Good. We'll chat.